conflict in Vietnam took a major toll on the lives of Vietnamese, both present at the time and future generations. The collateral damage of the conflict was beyond devastating and would have been lessened had America not gotten involved. The war negatively affected thousands of people and resulted in mass immigration from the country, which included Miss Nguyen.
Every single day of my life by my dad. Sometimes it's the same story 200 times. I would say probably yes, yeah, because I did not live with my dad for the first 7 years of my life. So when we were in Vietnam, he didn't get to live with us. So I lived with my grandfather. He was the one that was taking care of me. And then when we left Vietnam, my parents lied to me and said we're actually gonna go visit the other grandparents by boat. So I never really say goodbye to my grandfather. So, and then when we left, of course, with us being in a camp, and then came to the U.S. and we didn't have any paperwork, it took us a while to get a green card. Eventually, when I was able to make enough money to go back to visit my grandfather, but then he passed away. So I never got to see him again. Yes, but I can't remember much about it because I was only in Vietnam for about 7 years. So, of course, most of the time I was an infant, and a toddler, so I don't remember anything. But I do remember that, because I went to school for about 2 years, first and second grade in Vietnam. So obviously it was the teaching of the communists. So Ho Chi Minh, of course, is God, and everybody else is not, so including the Americans. I mean, we talk about Agent Orange a lot, and that happens mostly in the jungle. That affected the mountain yards of the Vietnamese. There's certain tribes in Vietnam that live in that area.
Agent Orange was a chemical used in chemical warfare in the Vietnam War. With it being so widely used, it affected all of Vietnam, not just the parts where the war was being fought. It affected the soil, crops, animals, and water. This caused it to damage the food sources and water sources. But unfortunately, the people in Vietnam had no other choice than to eat and drink these resources. This affected their health from the generations during the war to even the generations being born today, from birth defects to cancer and many other small side effects. These people were widely affected. We also used other chemicals like Agent Pink, Agent Green, Agent Blue, Agent White, and Agent Orange. Even though they were less used, they still caused the same effects.
The chemical warfare used in Vietnam by the Americans was yet another negative and unnecessary tactic that was utilized to cause mass destruction and death.
Because there's not really proof, but we all believe that Agent Orange have, maybe that's why Vietnam is like #1 with cancer patient in the world right now. So we all think it could have been because of Agent Orange. The chemical was in the soil, and you plant your vegetables and in the water and you water them. So it could be the reason why my mom is fighting cancer right now, and I'm not sure if that's what caused her to have cancer. I'm not sure. That's a possibility. Well, yeah, my dad, of course, do not share the same moon with the Vietnamese, with the communists if possible. That's why he has never gone back. He said he will never go back to Vietnam until all the communists, gone. So I guess he'll probably will never get to go back to Vietnam. We ended up in the Philippines. Took us about 2 weeks to get there by boat. So we escaped Vietnam like 4 times, and on the 4th time we made it to the Philippines. In the camp, I had a really good friend, and so we were living. Our apartment is basically right next to each other, and the wall between the apartments is like paper thin. It's actually made out of cardboard, so we cut a hole in the wall. So at night, when we couldn't sleep, we would write letters and pass through the holes. But also one night, he fell asleep first, and I was still awake, and I could hear the people that kind of like run the neighborhood, like a mayor of the neighborhood, because every night they would actually do inspections to make sure that the people who live in that camp are the people that actually live in that camp. But he was not legally there. He was supposed to be in a different camp, the camp that cannot go on to another country. He was in a kind of camp that would be returned to Vietnam. So I saw them, but I was trying to throw a pencil over through the holes to wake him up, but I guess, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. So he was already sleeping. So I actually saw my best friend got taken away. So there were 2 different camps. The first camp was in Palawan, Philippines. That type of camp, you have to go through interviews to the people that interview you decide if you can move on to another country or you have to get sent back to Vietnam. So of course, after 3 years there, we got accepted. Then we moved on to a camp in Bataan, Philippines, this one is mostly in a mountain. And at that camp, you then get interviewed to see which country will take you. So we got accepted into the U.S. because of my dad's role during the war that he was fighting alongside the U.S. So that's why we got to go to the U.S. because a lot of people didn't get to go to the U.S. because they don't have any kind of connections to the U.S. We got accepted, they told us they accepted us, but then it took us 2 years to get an airplane ticket to come to the U.S. So I spent a total of 6 years in the refugee camps. I came to the U.S. In Chicago right after a snowstorm on December 7, 1994, with only a t-shirt and a jean jacket. But it was not enough for like negative 5 degrees with snow that's piling high, as high as my shoulder actually. So it was really, really cold. There is electricity. Because we did not have electricity in the camp. So if we had to eat or something, I have to build a fire every day, 3 times a day to cook food. So this is convenience. You have to turn on the stove and it's on. You can watch TV. That's another thing. We don't have TVs or we don't have any of those. Basically, we don't have any of the luxury that people take for granted around here. And I also don't have to fetch water every day. So in the camp, they only turn on the water from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. is the nighttime when they turn the water on. And it's like, I forgot, 7 to 10 maybe in the morning. So those are the 2 times that you can go to where the water fountain is at. And then you have to have a bucket, you have to wait for it to fill up and you bring it back and you pour them into your storage. It's just like a big canister. And you have to do it until it's filled for the day, twice a day. That happened. For example, I worked at Kroger when I was in high school. And the produce manager of Kroger, I just, say hi and stuff to him because we worked together. And he just turned around to me and said, I don't like Vietnamese. So eventually I found out from his wife that he was crippled during the Vietnam War. So he hated all the Vietnamese. I think it's gonna turn out the same anyway for Vietnam because if America is not involved, the communists will win. They would have won anyway. So for the Vietnamese, it wouldn't make any difference because we still have to go through the same thing. The only thing that might have made a difference is that it lowered the number of deaths because there were like millions of Vietnamese died, almost 70,000 Americans died. So that might have been the only thing that it could have been if the United States didn't get involved. The number of deaths would have been lower.
For example, the My Lai massacre, which occurred on March 16, 1968, resulted in 300 to 500 innocent civilian deaths as the Americans rampaged the village in a total war campaign. This massacre is a single example of the mass and harsh devastation the Americans caused in the country. This article from January 1969 displays an interview from a soldier who had returned from the war. He exhibits the horror of the war and the devastation America was causing, as well as iterates that America is not helping and should withdraw. He shares personal recollections of time spent with Vietnamese families and people, and recognizes that America's presence was destroying their lives. Overall, America getting involved in the conflict in Vietnam did not improve their circumstances and furthered the devastation of the war. Miss Nguyen was one of many who had to leave their home and suffer immensely from the damage of the war, yet one of few that proceeded to the United States and made a successful life for themselves. America increased casualties and still lost the war, something that had a massive negative effect on millions of people and inhibited potential prosperity.